My name is Paul.carganilla. I'm the Community Affairs Manager for the Oxnard Police Department. In 2019, I was working here as a dispatcher when the Chief of Police asked for my assistance in creating a community briefing video about an officer-involved shooting that had occurred just a couple days prior. That shooting was the beginning of a truly inspirational series of events, which we will explore today in this, the first episode of the Oxnard Police Department podcast. This episode contains material that may be disturbing for some listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, I'm Jason Benites. I'm the police chief in the city of Oxnard, California. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Oxnard, it's a city of about 200,000 people on California's coast between LA and Santa Barbara. Oxnard is Ventura County's largest city. The story in this podcast is about something that I haven't seen before in my 28 years of police service. This is a story of an unfortunate situation that resulted in a shooting between one of our officers and a young lady who was in crisis. However, that's just part one of this story. So let me set a backdrop for this. It was the morning of May 3rd, 2019. The Oxnard Police Department's dispatch center received calls of a woman with a knife. The caller described the woman as being 18 years of age, wearing a red shirt and blue shorts. It was reported that she seemed disturbed and that she was walking around and waving the knife. The caller also indicated that the female was possibly armed with a gun. The same caller recontacted dispatch 3 more times, and during these calls reported that the woman was getting increasingly worse and that she was screaming and threatening people. Here is an excerpt from the call to our dispatch center.
911, what's the emergency?
Yes, there's a young lady outside with, I'm sorry. She's waving a knife at me.
She's waving a knife at you?
Yes.
Okay, what's the address?
San Gorgonio Avenue?
Have you seen her before? Do you know her?
No, she seems disturbed, like, I'm not sure.
Do you think she's under the influence of drugs or alcohol?
I think.
Do you think she has mental health issues?
Yes.
Officer Timothy Roberts, who had been with our department for about 4 years, arrived on scene and made contact with a female in a dirt field behind the business. She was of the same approximate age that the caller had described and was also wearing a red shirt and blue shorts. The encounter was captured in its entirety on the officer's body-worn camera. We released this video to the public a few days after the incident.
Hi! Come here, please.
After Officer Roberts called to her, the young woman approached him, closing to a distance of about 12 feet.
Yes.
Why is someone calling saying you're waving a knife around? Don't reach for it. Put it down.
As Officer Roberts spoke with her, it became apparent to him that she had a white-handled kitchen knife in her waistband. He told her not to remove it from there.
Sit right here on the curb. Don't reach for the knife. Sit right here on the curb.
Why? What happens if I reach for it?
Then something bad's going to happen.
The young woman disregarded the officer and produced the knife in her hand, showing a blade that was about 6 inches in length. She then held it in a way that would be used to stab someone. Officer Roberts instructed her to drop the knife.
Put the knife down.
She then began to walk directly towards him.
Station 3, 14 boy, expedite back subject's arm with a knife, and she's threatening with it.
Officer Roberts retreated backwards in an attempt to create some space between them. He continued to give her verbal commands to drop the weapon as he retreated for a distance of approximately 50 yards.
Drop it.
Confirming you copy the response code. Come on, shoot. I've been waiting all day. Units are covering unit reference Leslie
She ignored his repeated instruction to drop the knife, and she continued to advance towards him.
Drop it. Drop it.
No.
I'm backing up westbound. She's still armed with a knife. He's gonna drop it. Back.
14 way.
Drop it.
As this was occurring, a second officer, Officer Skye Boyson, had arrived and was in the process of retrieving a shotgun that fires beanbag projectiles. This, quote, less than lethal option is there to stun or disorient the person should the opportunity present itself. As he was doing this, the female began to run directly towards Officer Roberts with a knife in her hand. Officer Roberts fired his weapon 3 times, and the young woman was struck by gunfire. As they are trained to do, both Officer Roberts and Boyson immediately switched into life-saving mode. Officers promptly rendered first aid to her until medical personnel arrived on scene.
Shots fired. EMS en route.
Let's get the knife away.
Where are you hit? You got one here?
Alright, hang on, okay? It's gonna be alright.
I'm so sorry.
Okay.
You got one here?
He's got 3.
Okay, stay on
More 3. One right here on that side.
Hey, you're gonna be okay, all right? Just stay with us.
The young woman was seriously wounded by the gunfire and was hospitalized. She was 17 years old at the time. In the earliest stages of the investigation, we learned that she was the same one that had made the calls into our dispatch center. This incident involved what is often referred to as an attempted, quote, suicide by cop. This term is used to describe when a suicidal person intentionally engages in life-threatening behavior with a dangerous weapon or what appears to be a dangerous weapon towards law enforcement officers with the intent to provoke them to shoot the suicidal person in self-defense or to protect others. In most cases, this is where the story would near its end, and in this case, this is just the first chapter. During this podcast, you'll hear much more about what happened from there. Something very amazing, and as I mentioned before, something that I have not personally witnessed during my career.
This is Rod Codman, a senior deputy public defender with the Ventura County Public Defender's Office. He's the attorney appointed to represent the young woman involved in the incident.
When I first met the young woman, I was very concerned about her mental health. It was obvious to me, based on my experience in the reading of the police reports and watching of the body cam evidence, that she had attempted to take her life by way of suicide by cop. I was concerned about triggering her. However, at the end of the first meeting, which was about an hour long, I asked her what she wanted. What was her goal and objective? And her goal and objective was to meet the police officer and ask the police officer to forgive her and apologize to the police officer and thank the police officer for saving her life, which was something I'd never heard before in my entire career. I told her that I'd like for us to spend some time thinking about it, allow me to process that and see what I could do to make that happen, but that we would work towards that goal. So as I developed a relationship with the young woman, along with my social worker, and received input from the young woman's therapist, I believed that it would be not only her express interest, but it would be in her best interest if she would be able to make this happen, her goal and her objective.
After surviving 3 gunshot wounds, the young woman was determined to do everything in her power to heal and accomplish these goals she set with her attorney. In the hospital, she was told by doctors that there was a strong possibility she would never walk again. But with a new sense of purpose and determination, she made a full recovery and was discharged from the hospital on June 26, 2019. Public Defender Codman and his assistant, along with the young woman's social worker, therapist, and the district attorney assigned to her case, worked with the police department to set up a meeting. And on January 23rd of 2020, almost 9 months after the original incident, the young woman achieved her goal. In a meeting with her support team, along with the police chief at the time, Scott Whitney, and assistant chief, now Chief Jason Benites, the young woman sat down face to face with Officer Roberts, apologized for her actions the morning of the shooting, and thanked him for saving her life. Of course, the healing process didn't end there. She continued sessions with her therapist and continued to develop a friendship with the police department and with Officer Roberts. Recognizing how unique this story is of her path to wellness and the importance of mental health, the young woman was inspired to share this story and sit down with me for an interview along with Officer Tim Roberts. She hopes that this might speak to someone who needs to hear her message, to remind them that they are not alone, and to encourage them to reach out for help. Here is that interview. I think the first, obviously from the police department standpoint, the first thing we hear is a phone call into dispatch. Obviously, a lot was going on to bring you to that point in time. And as that point in time was the first that we heard anything about this, from your standpoint, how did you get there?
It started off with a very difficult month in April. April's a very difficult month for me personally. And for a while, I wasn't even thinking of getting to that point. It was always, stay strong until the end of the year. Like, try to keep pushing next day, next hour. I was always trying to be optimistic and look in the future. But then those final weeks of that month always get incredibly overwhelming for me. And it got so bad where I started having a plan to harm myself. But then my distress with the whole situation and all those bad days in 1 month just kind of snowballed into one big negative thing. And just so many negative events were happening at that time for me. It just happened on that day. It was a plan. I didn't think that I was going to involve someone else. But
when you say it was a plan, were you planning on committing suicide?
Yes.
Okay. Was the plan to do it out in public, or were you just kind of wrestling with yourself at that point?
It was more like, what is actually going to work? Because I unfortunately do have a history of, trying to commit suicide. But every time it was failed. And I survived, and I just get even more frustrated with the fact that I failed. And now it's at that point, I was like, what is actually going to work? And at first it was, I'm going to do it somewhere isolated. No one's going to see me. It's I didn't really think of involving anyone else. But then at that moment, it was who are the only people that we know that have an access to something lethal? Police officers. And that is, I do feel guilty for that assumption, because a police officer is there to help always. It's horrible to want to turn them to harm someone of their community that they swore to protect.
So was the plan to draw the police there?
The plan originally was something with just me doing something. But then I was thinking of something instant, quick. Because in that moment, I was just I just need to not be here. Because everything was so overwhelming for me at that point. I was awake the entire night before that happened. And I was just formulating it in my head. I was okay, what kind of gets their attention? What would make them come really fast? And then I was thinking of all these things, and I was weapons call. And I know it just feels awful saying this, but yeah, I was thinking what sounds the most threatening? I mean, obviously a short woman doesn't sound that scary. And then I look into my kitchen drawer and I just look for the scariest looking thing in there, and it was pretty dull, but I was doesn't matter. It's a threat regardless.
It's true. So obviously we're having this conversation because you feel comfortable sharing this. There is a message that you want to share ultimately, and speaking very openly as you are about wanting to commit suicide kind of indicates that you're at a point in your life where you've gotten help that you need, and you're on the other side of this enough to the point where you're comfortable talking about it and getting the message out.
Yeah, I'd second that. I am at a place where I do feel supported and welcome amongst other people in general. And I'm really happy that the police department has really put forth the step to support me. At first, when I wanted to meet Officer Roberts, I was like, oh, is he even going to want to meet me? Like, this person tried to hurt him. Like, he's going to be thinking, what? But when I was met with that with such an overwhelmingly positive response on January 23rd of 2020, we all got together, and I was so nervous. And then Chief Whitney comes up to me and says, hey, how you doing? And then I just automatically feel more welcome, and I feel less tense. I was still tense throughout the whole thing. It wasn't like, oh, I was uncomfortable. I just did not feel like good that I was there.
Sure. And, I think a big part of it is, by profession, police officers are people who want to help. They want to help. They want to make everybody feel safe and feel supported. Knowing you personally as I do now, I know that you are a giant supporter and a huge fan of law enforcement. Was it always that way? Have you always, or was this event something that kind of triggered that?
Well, I was always a law enforcement supporter even beforehand, so it kind of makes it worse. But I did know an SRO. He was basically my friend in like most of high school. I enjoyed talking to him all the time. That was my only connection. It was never, oh, I'm willing to reach out for help. Mm-hmm. I did have support. I was just too scared to reach out. And I've always assumed that those close to me didn't want to deal with those issues. I felt like the burden was too heavy to impose on someone else. And whenever I even communicated the most basic of needs, I always felt it was too much of a burden. So with something as huge as wanting to take my own life, I felt like it was way too much of a burden to put on someone else and make them deal with it, make them scared all the time that one day I might just flee,
Now, the morning we're talking about, Officer Roberts, or Tim, you had just started your shift, correct?
Yes.
So was this the first call you had that morning?
Mm-hmm.
How do you recall it coming out?
There had been another call that was going on somewhere in the city where they were either chasing somebody or they had somebody that they were dealing with, and it was kind of it sounded kind of hectic on the radio. I had kind of started making my way that way, and then this call of a person with a knife came out at the Carl's Jr. right next to where everything happened, and they sent me and another officer to that, and I was the one that showed up first.
As you can describe it, from when you pulled up and you saw her standing there in the vacant lot, what went through your mind?
First thing I thought was, somebody called about this girl? Like, about her? And so I just said, hey, what's up? Like, what's going on? And kind of everything happened from there.
Did you see the knife immediately?
No.
And so you're asking her what's going on. Could you tell that she was agitated, or what was your first impression of her mental state at that point?
I think she was smiling, from what I remember. But it looked like she was almost happy that we were there at first.
So...
And that caught me even more off guard. I was like, yeah, someone called about her?
So when did it kind of feel like it turned?
Well, in the video, when you see she lifts her shirt up on her right side or left side, whatever side it was, she lifts her shirt up on her side, and you see the handle of this knife like coming out. And you're like, oh, they did call about her. It is her.
And she, if I remember correctly, you asked her to come over and sit on the curb by the car. And did she seem compliant at that point?
Yeah, because she had I was like, hey, come on over here. And she walked over. I was like, oh, okay, she's not going to run away or run into the street or do anything. She had done everything I had told her to up to that point, so we could check on her. But at that point, it kind of turned.
What is the normal procedure for our officers when you're contacting someone who is in possession of a weapon?
Well, it depends on the situation. It's a lot of feel. So if she had been standing there waving a gun in the dirt lot,
sure,
I wouldn't have just said, "Oh, hey, come on over,
come on over, sit down."
Men standing there,
you kind of got to read situations based on what's right in front of you. So, and that comes with a little bit of time in dealing with people and learning how people react. And not to say that two situations are ever the same, but you always have that kind of danger thought in the back of your mind, just as like a little reminder, like, be careful. There's always someone out there that could want to hurt you,
right,
and could be capable of it.
Now, from what I learned after the fact, had you just taught a course or a training about this sort of situation?
We have, to give it some context, the department has a force options unit, which includes force options and de-escalation training. We had done our training in our simulator, our Milo simulator, and there was a similar situation with a subject with a knife who gradually comes closer to the officer as they're trying to make contact with them and get their attention and get the situation under control. This scenario kind of tests officers' ability to recognize threats, recognize bystanders, other people that are out in the public that you need to keep safe as well. So part of my being on this unit was watching officers as they went through that training and debriefing them after, saying, like, what did you see? What did you feel? Did you see this over here? What was your feeling when you were going through this?
So when this starts happening, and as I remember seeing on the video, you said something like, put the knife down, or something, something bad might happen. And it seemed like that was when you, I guess, made the decision to stop being so compliant, and you just started to casually approach him with the weapon still. And I think for anyone who has seen the video, I think what stands out and what is very memorable is how many times he asks you to drop it. How calm Officer Roberts stayed and how calm you seemed as you continued to approach him, and no matter how many times he told you to drop it, you just kept saying, no, I'm not going to. Had you made the decision at that point that this was it?
When he approached, that's kind of when I was like, this is it. But I was still, like, my mind, there was like two people just kind of fighting it out. Like, there was this side of me who was like, no, just give up. He's too nice. Like, ask for help. And then there's this other side where it's like, I was just angry, and I was just like, do it. Like, no, what? You're going to live and get what? People are going to forget about you, and no one's going to care. So you're just going to be on this embarrassing video. Still happened, but...
Were you thinking about the video? Because these body-worn cameras, you can't even tell that they're really on or recording.
I did know enough about body cams where there is situations like mine just on there. Mm. And it's not really that I cared about, like, other people. It was more like, oh, one of the worst things in my life is just going to be on there constantly.
And you're thinking about that as you're having that internal struggle of, like, this.
Yeah, and then this other part of me is just like, who cares? You're just going to die anyway. Who survives a gunshot? Who does? Like, you'd have to be like a big guy to survive something like that. Like, as he said, like, I'm just a little girl,
So this struggle is going on inside your mind as you're walking toward him, and Officer Roberts is calmly walking backwards and asking you to drop it. Does your mind go back to that force option training, or are you just in that moment and the training has done its job and is automatic in your head?
As police officers, we are always thinking about scenarios. Not that we want them to happen. Certainly not like this.
Right.
But there's always the potential that you're confronted with something like this. And So there's a little bit of mental rehearsal. I think any officer you talk to would tell you that they've gone over situations in their head, how they're going to respond to things, how they're going to react or hope they're going to react. That was kind of what was kind of coming up in my mind. Like, okay, I want to make sure that I give, as much opportunity as I can for this person to comply. But at the same time, I still need to go home at the end of the day.
Absolutely. So. And this is a good spot to just jump in with this before we, explore the rest of what happened that morning. But, you see on social media, you hear people say, big, strong officer, why did he have to use his gun? Why couldn't he have tased her? Or why didn't he just, take her down?
I'll explain a little bit about just human anatomy. So there's major arteries that are running through your arms, legs, just inches from the skin. And it doesn't take much to hit one of those. And if you hit one of those, you can bleed out in less than 30 seconds. So yes, it is a little girl with a knife, but that knife, even if she doesn't know what she's doing, she can get lucky, or I can get unlucky, whatever it is, and end up dead.
Sure.
Lethal force is in order to prevent death or serious bodily injury
to yourself
or other people.
Right. Because this was out in public. We weren't in a vacuum. And when you were speaking earlier about you left the house with the knife, did you kind of know about this? Like if you had a weapon, this would make it less of a choice for him?
No, I just figured, he's going to come out gun drawn, ready to fight me, I didn't expect him to come up, calmly as he did. It really threw me off, so that's kind of why I was, smiling. I was like, oh, this is really weird. Why is he acting like this? I know it seems, hypocritical of me to say this, but I've never hurt somebody physically, ever. I am incapable of being physically aggressive. That's why it was so hard for me to do that. When he told me, I feel bad saying this, but when he said something bad's going to happen, the anger in me, it was just okay, he's giving me the pass. And if I just act a little more crazier, he'll give me what I want. And then it'll just be done, and I don't have to deal with anything anymore.
So even in that mental state, you were able to recognize this is him giving me a way out.
Yeah. That's how he essentially saw it. I didn't see it he wants to not do that. It was more, I did get that feeling where he didn't. It's pretty clear in the video. He did not want to do that. And after I fell, I kind of got knocked back into my normal thinking state. And that's basically why when I was on the ground, I was profusely apologizing. I wasn't apologizing because I got shot. I was apologizing because I hurt this officer and it made him fear for his life,
Just to rewind just a little bit, so when you're walking toward him and he's asking you to drop it, obviously the only video I've seen is the body cam, so I don't know what you were seeing, but I see you at one point look around and then just make the decision to run at him. Do you remember that moment? What you saw, what you felt?
It was a blur, honestly. Even 2 years later, I'm barely getting memories back of it. But for that moment, I think it was, I can't really say, but my best guess would be, it was is there anyone around?
I think the second officer pulling up.
Okay, so that's when he arrived.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I was standing by his car when it happened, and he ran right to the back of his car to get a beanbag or a less lethal shotgun.
Oh, okay. See, we don't see that in the video.
No, you can see a little bit if you look at where it happened,
mm-hmm.
and then all of a sudden there's a car right there that I'm going back to for
right.
the first aid stuff. That's right where he was. So I was standing right at his front wheel.
Gotcha.
When that happened. So that was kind of the change in the environment that kind of sparked everything.
So your backup has arrived, your backup is with you, and you see her make the decision to run at you. Did you know that, this is an attempted suicide by cop?
It's impossible to know that
Right.
in the moment.
Right.
And she hadn't given any indication of that with what she was saying either. So it was like kind of just a, that flash of like a life or death type thing in that moment.
Now, with the discharge of your weapon, she went straight down, and as you just mentioned on the video, that you immediately just start saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." What was it? Was it fear that grabbed you and shook you out of it, or was it just the survival instinct?
Well, I figured I was gonna die. Like, I really was gonna die.
Really?
And I was just saying, like, I don't want this guy to live with like the guilt of of that, because it's really not like, I wasn't gonna get mad at him. Like, I didn't want anyone to be mad at him, so that's why I said that. I was like, I'm sorry, it was my fault. Nothing to do with him. He didn't do anything wrong. That's how I truly saw it, like, since the get-go.
Yeah. And so in your mind, you were on your way out, and you just wanted to let him know.
Yeah, that even though, like, contrary to my actions, I did care about him, and I knew that if I passed away, I wanted him to know that I'm sorry, and that I really, even though we only knew each other for like 10 minutes, like, that I cared, I wanted him to be well, and I didn't want him to just be sitting there someday and just being like, oh, like, that happened.
Yeah. I think that what was, like, very surprising for me, not because, like, I'm like, why did that happen? But just because you don't think of it. Immediately after it happens, the officers go and get the med bag and do everything that they can to provide aid. That to me, when I saw the video, was just an eye-opener, because we don't think of that as normal civilians on the street every day, and that officers are obviously here to serve and protect, but in that situation, the first thing they wanted to do was to help you again. Was there any feeling inside of, gosh, of regret, other than other than like what you may have put them through, but were you at all like, this was a big mistake, I want to live?
At the moment, no.
Really?
But no, at the moment there was like that brief flash, like, oh, like, crap, like, I should live. And when I woke up, like, after my, like, in the hospital, it was just more like, I was so angry at myself. It was like, I heard that guy, and then I'm here, like, dying.
Yeah.
Again.
Based on our previous conversations, I know that you dealt with a lot of guilt after it happens. Can you just talk about that?
To this day. Yeah, when I was in the hospital, I'd have, like, random dreams about it. Like, it'd just be, like, me, like, on glass wall, and he's just standing, like, facing the other way. And I was just like, I'm sorry. Like, that was literally, like, I'd have so many invasive dreams about it. And I'd always, like, that was my first priority. When they said, oh, you might be medically cleared in, like, 2 weeks, I was like, okay, I'm going to go. And my family did not like that.
You're going to go where?
That I wanted to see Officer Roberts.
Oh, okay.
That I wanted to instantly let him know that, like, there's no wrongdoing on his part, that I recognize his humanity, and that I just want him to be okay. Because that was always the first priority. As I said, the reason I said sorry was because if I passed away, I would have, you don't feel anything, but it wouldn't have felt right on my part.
What is that like as an officer when you find out, when somebody tells you that this person that you were involved in this scenario with wants to meet you again?
That was interesting. It's kind of hard to describe. I know that's kind of cliche, but it's nice knowing that that person still sees you in a good light, even though everything happened the way it did, and there was a bad outcome to it. But it's definitely interesting. It's hard to put into words. It's really hard to explain what it's like.
You say there was a bad outcome to it, but here we are. Having a conversation.
In that moment, there was a bad outcome.
Right.
Yeah, no one was sure if I would live or die.
Right.
Like, emergency room, they didn't even know.
What was that recovery like for you?
It was awful, like, emotionally. Physically, I'm pretty much all right, you know? It's crazy to say that, but when I got there, they really thought I would die because my liver would not stop bleeding. And I was in the ICU, the pediatric ICU, for a week. And I don't remember a lot of it, but I do remember just having a huge incision. And that the doctors were really cautious of me because they said, like, oh, you might not walk again. Because I had a hit in my leg. And they thought, no, you're not going to walk again. You're going to need tons of little devices to help you just live in general. You might have to have, like, a bunch of machines just hooked up to you, like, all the time. And it was frustrating. Like, it was frustrating that I couldn't move. And it was frustrating that I lived. It was frustrating that I couldn't talk to Officer Roberts and just let him know that he has no ill will towards him and that I always am going to care about him and his well-being. And a lot of people say, like, oh, like, people in the hospital who were with me would always say, like, why are you focusing on him? Like, you're hurt. You're literally dying on this bed as we speak. And I didn't care about that. Like, I just remember so many arguments, like, in the hospital about that, like, with nurses, everybody. But that was something I always stuck with. It was always something I was going to be adamant about, and I'm still adamant about it to this day. But recovery was awful.
And now, how are you doing?
I'd say I'm doing okay. I have ambitions for the future. I have a good, supportive police department. Officer Roberts has been very supportive of me as well. He's been nothing but supportive. Probably thrown off at best, but supportive regardless.
Kind of sitting down and having this conversation, I think it's an interesting thing hearing both sides of the story, and it was your idea. You wanted to tell the story. Why? Why did you want to tell the story?
Because I feel like in many of these situations, like, the person in my situation does not live. And I feel like it's my duty as someone who lived to promote mental health awareness and always be willing to reach out, understanding to someone who may be struggling. Sure, you may be frustrated with them for feeling that way, but if you give them even the least bit of understanding and support, it's a game changer for sure. For me, if I felt like unconditionally supported by someone, I don't feel like I'd reach that point.
Would you say that's the lesson you've learned, or is there multiple lessons?
Multiple.
What has this taught you?
It's taught me to reach out, most importantly. It's taught me my value as a person. That I know it took that to realize it. And it also took that to realize that some people would miss me and some people would just not be okay with me not being here right now. But it's always like, I'm willing to understand people now. Back then I wasn't patient with anybody. I was always angry. And now I'm willing to understand people and look at people's different points of view and try to sympathize, because I don't feel like a lot of people really understood what was going on with me. I mean, Officer Roberts probably didn't either. That was my fault. But main message, just always reach out to people, give them understanding, and especially for those in law enforcement after dealing with such a situation, just always reach out.
It's a perfect segue. As a law enforcement officer, what did this situation leave you with differently, if anything?
That's hard to answer. I know I've said that a few times, but
no one's expecting it to be easy.
It's an interesting situation overall.
Did it change you in any way that you feel comfortable talking about?
No. I think the fact that we're here today and she's still alive is a big is a big factor in that. But I know it's something I never want to go through again. I know that for sure. I don't have any malice or ill will towards her at all. Maybe it's given me a little bit of perspective on like maybe detaching people from their actions and their, because like she says, that's not the person I am that I was that day. So just kind of seeing that like really firsthand.
Yeah. Anything else you want people to know and take away from this?
I'm happy to say that with this journey I've had with the police department, I've learned that my life has value. I've learned that I do have a place with others. And I've had overall just so much support, and I learned that support does exist, and that sometimes a burden isn't really a burden to other people if they truly care about you. I've met new friends, and I've made relationships with former friends stronger. This experience has changed my ways of looking at things. It has changed the way I experience life. This experience and the support that it has followed has given me a unique perspective, learning to value reaching out and learning that I was not a burden on those around me. Also learning to look deeper into why people may think or feel certain ways, to have more patience and understanding towards others, and learning that not everyone's intentions are bad. I don't expect everyone to understand me with this interview. I'm at a point where I'm happy with myself. I feel supported and loved. I want people to be able to hear the full story, because one story by itself is never ideal. It is ultimately the listener's choice what to do with this story. I want people to give others in their lives a chance, and to try to understand those that are commonly labeled as quote-unquote troubled, because sometimes those troubled people just need a caring figure in their life to reassure them that everything is okay and never to give up. Always make space for people in your life. Always ask someone how they're doing, because that can literally change everything. Let them know that they're wanted. Let them know that you're always willing to lend a hand if things go south. And just be unconditional with your love and support. Always try to understand people, be patient with them. And that's what I'd say is my final message.
Any final thoughts?
No. Glad you're here.
On July 8th of 2021, the young woman's case was up for a probation review hearing at the Ventura County Juvenile Justice Center. In attendance to show support for the young woman were Ventura County District Attorney Eric Nazarenko, Oxnard Chief of Police Jason Benites, and Officer Tim Roberts. Officer Roberts spoke to the judge in support of dismissing the case, terminating the young woman's probation, and sealing her record. Chief Benites did as well.
It's something I had not done before, but given the nature of the circumstances here, we all felt it was very important to support this person, because we felt that in supporting her, this was one more thing that would help her on her road to recovery and give her some boost that there are people in this world that care about her. We all agreed that this was a thing that needed not punitive action, but it needed care. And I think with having such things as care in this world, that actually helps people to get back onto the path that they intended to be. It took a lot of compassion from the officer to show up to the event. I really wanted to commend the public defender involved here, Rod Codman, as well as the DA's office, for really stepping up and reaching out to us to talk about this. Because when they did, they actually we all realized that we were on the same track with this, and we all wanted the same thing. And what that thing is that we want to make sure that we do the best we can to help people, and this was just that.
Her attorney, Rod Codman.
Ultimately, the judge agreed that it was in the interest of justice to have the case dismissed, her record sealed, probation terminated. This young woman's life has completely changed. Since meeting the officer, she's not been hospitalized again for any type of mental illness. She has a future. She believes she has a future. She had told me that she never thought that she would ever live to see herself as an adult. She now wants to be an EMT. The relationship with her mother and her younger sister has improved exponentially. What's interesting, when we walked out of the courtroom, Mom and sister and our young woman now hugged and cried, tears of joy. And as much time as I've spent around this family and this young woman, I had never seen that type of raw emotion that was in such a positive way. That is something that also came out of this. I'm positive that the family is going to continue to grow and do better as a result of this tragedy.
If you'd like to hear more true stories from the Oxnard Police Department, be sure to subscribe to the Oxnard Police Department podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. And follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter for news and announcements regarding future episodes. Thank you for listening.